What if the best dark fantasy book you'll read this year had no words at all? Pun intended. In this spoiler-free dark fantasy book review of the Wordless Book by Shawn Spencer, you not only get a direct link to the book, but also 7 reasons why I think it's one of the best dark fantasy books I've read so far. This is the Birger review.
Robbie boy, it's time to wake up.
They call themselves Reapers.
Robert, we can't fight them. They're too powerful.
Jess, we have to try.
Hi Taste Driver. I've broken up this book review into 4 different sections. 7 reasons why I think the Wordless Book is one of the best dark fantasy books I've read so far. 1 bonus section, a Taste Driver question, and a direct link to the Wordless Book. And best of all, reason 7 why I think the Wordless Book is one of the best dark fantasy books is actually the most interesting one, since it reveals the number 1 story-related reason why the Wordless Book fits my tastes as a dark fantasy author. Reason 1. Balancing darkness and light. Story themes. The world of the Wordless Book. Picture an active summer camp, but instead of it being in the summer, fall is approaching. It's a bit colder and a bit darker. But despite this, children are still attending activities like canoeing and mountain climbing. Laughter and silliness are mixed with the seriousness of the camp counselor's leadership. Then, imagine a different realm, one that is hidden behind the veil of the summer camp's reality. The dark and magical Lovecraftian world of eldritch horrors, patiently awaiting to be unleashed onto the world. The story taking place in these 2 realms, one of light and one of darkness, consists of a combination of dark and intense moments, mixed with romantic and tender scenes between 2 of the main characters. Both the dark moments and the romantic ones and other scenes in the story are also sprinkled with humor, which creates variations in the story. I also think the story manages to create an equal balance between despair and hope. The characters fight with hope against seemingly impossible odds. They take 1 step forward, they lose. Another step forward, but 2 steps backwards. Then they try again, and they win. Or don't, depending on how dark the scene is. The story also has some good plot twists, like things may not appear as they seem. There might be hidden elements that are revealed later, or they may have been things that have happened in the past that have influenced the story greatly. The book also has a map of the summer camp, which makes it both easy and fun to follow along with the story when the characters travel to various areas of the camp. I really liked following this map. I'll be talking some more about the story, spoiler-free of course, in reason 6, why I think the Wordless Book is one of the best dark fantasy books, where I'll tell you about video games and movies the Wordless Book reminds me of. Reason 2. Describing like a poet. The writing. Shawn writes very lyrical and metaphorical descriptions when he writes his scenes. These descriptions can be beautiful, like in this romantic example. Those honey-sweet lips are rose petals soft, while her sparkling round eyes are an angelic amber. Or they can be more intense, like in this example. Words fumble out of his mouth like a greased up football, as if he is an actor fighting to remember his lines before the director calls out action. The story's action scenes feel exciting and vivid, thanks to this descriptive writing style as well. Sometimes the descriptions linger on a bit too long, which makes it a bit harder to follow along with what's happening. But there's always room for improvement, isn't there? I also think Shawn writes emotional descriptions very well, especially when it comes to fear, which is very fitting for dark fantasy. Like in this example, her cold, clammy sweat seeps from her pores, her skin crawls and her bones rattle. Every muscle screams of a horror unseen as her knees buckle and she collapses. I also liked seeing cool and fitting use of famous quotes in the story, like the quote, "ashes to ashes, dust to dust," which was used in a very fitting scene. I won't mention which scene this quote is used in, though. Why? This is a spoiler-free book review, remember? Reason 3. Weaknesses as strengths. The characters. The most interesting thing about the characters is how their weaknesses are woven into the story, without revealing what those weaknesses are or who has them. First, imagine the character's fear. Next, this fear is mentioned or experienced, sometimes at multiple occasions. And as the story progresses, the character may or may not be forced to face this particular fear. That, I think, is the epitome of character progression for dark fantasy characters. I enjoyed one character's face your fears moment the most, which involved being forced to face and traverse a whole area consisting of what the character fears. The bravery that this young character showed in this scene was very commendable. Once you've read the book, you'll know which scene I mean. There were also moments when evil characters showed emotions that the reader can sympathize with. There is, for example, a scene, without revealing too much, where an evil servant shows disappointment and sadness that is connected to its master. I think scenes like these really help deepen the antagonists of a story, while also successfully avoiding the trope of them just being pure evil. I can't wait to reveal the most interesting reason 7 why I think the Wordless Book is one of the best dark fantasy books, since it reveals the number 1 reason why the Wordless Book fits my taste as a dark fantasy author. But before that, we have reason 4, 5 and 6 to look forward to. Reason 4 lightens up the dark, the humor. Humor, jokes and bickering between characters is a recurring theme in the Wordless Book. The humor manages to light up and occasionally deviate from the otherwise dark and serious tone of the story, a contrast that I greatly appreciated. The humor mainly takes place in 3 different forms. 1. Banter and bickering between the children that attend the summer camp. This humor can be based on the kids' overconfidence, and other times on a spoiled kid's interactions with someone who really has the ability to talk back. 2. Humor between the 2 main characters, sometimes romantic and sometimes not. You know, like when a married couple lovingly bickers with one another, and sometimes they do that in a more serious way. You get both types in this story. And 3. Funny banter between the antagonists. The banter combined with their evil seriousness sometimes makes this humor even more funny. These interactions actually remind me of a TV series, but I'll talk more about that in reason 6, why I think the Wordless Book is one of the best dark fantasy books. So be sure to stick around for that. Reason 5. But just before that, could you be awesome and hit the like button and the new hype button? Both buttons help this video to be discovered by more people here on YouTube, so I'd really appreciate it. The new hype button can also be used up to 3 times. So hit away. Thank you. You're awesome. Reason 5. Darkness meets the elements, the magic. The main magic featured in the Wordless Book is a combination of 3 different kinds of magic. Magic 1, necromancy and warlock-like magic, namely the summoning of the undead and demons, respectively. Magic 2, elemental powers, like fire and water. When it comes to the antagonists, I especially liked how this reminded me of a particular video game franchise. But more on that in Reason 6, a bit later in this video. And Magic 3, a soul and mind-based magic. I won't spoil the scene, but I must say, how this power is first revealed in the story is really cool. And when it happened, I remember thinking to myself, now this feels like dark fantasy. The most interesting Reason 7 why I think the Wordless Book is one of the best dark fantasy books is soon upon us, where I'll reveal the number 1 reason why the Wordless Book fits my tastes as a dark fantasy author. But before that, Reason 6, video games and movies, and the bonus, even the dark has its spots. Improvements. As I mentioned earlier, there's always room for improvement, even among the best. So let's talk a bit about it, with some constructive criticism. The Wordless Book has a slow burn beginning. Slow burn in itself isn't a bad thing, while I do think that starting a story slow is. Even though the pacing of the Wordless Book picks up after the first few chapters, I think the story would have benefited greatly from having a more dramatic opening, perhaps focused on the main antagonistic force, or focused on something from the past, or from the future. Something short and sweet would have sufficed. Maybe as a prologue, something that hooks you in right away, making you feel like, yeah, this I want to know more about. Thankfully, the superb and dramatic text blurb at the back of the book made up for the book's slow burn beginning and managed to draw me in regardless. Sometimes the characters' appearances were described in too many different ways. For example, maybe first their boots were described, then their trousers, next their hair, then their shirt, and finally their eyes. While one part of me appreciates knowing how a character looks in more detail, I have to be honest here. After flipping a few pages, I had already forgotten how the characters looked in the first place. I'd say choosing 1, 2, or a maximum of 3 descriptions for each character and then sticking to them would make it a lot easier to remember how a character looks. Sometimes when multiple characters were talking at the same time, their dialogue didn't mention their name, which made it hard to know who was actually talking. So I think either beginning or ending a dialogue sentence with the character's name would have improved the dialogue further. There were some minor spelling errors here and there, but nothing that took away from the enjoyment of the story. And now, let's talk video game and movie references. Reason 6. Awesome video games and movies. Story inspirations. I'd say the feel of the story in the Wordless Book mainly reminds me of the movie Friday the 13th with its summer camp setting, combined with dark fantasy author H.P. Lovecraft's Necronomicon when it comes to the focus on a dark and otherworldly book, and the monsters in the story and their clashes with the story's characters reminds me of 2 things in particular. 1, the cocky and sometimes over-the-top monster battles in the video games Devil May Cry, games in which you fight various demonic monsters of various sizes and power levels. And 2, the survival horror elements, reminiscent of the video game franchise Resident Evil in which you are forced to survive encounters with zombies and undead monsters of various kinds, while having limited ammo and healing items. And I'm a big fan of both Devil May Cry and Resident Evil, so I'm definitely not complaining. Speaking of the undead, there is a particular scene in the Wordless Book that reminded me a lot of the house that a group of survivors take shelter in from the movie Night of the Living Dead by George A. Romero. Whether the scene I'm thinking about was inspired by Night of the Living Dead or not, only the author of the Wordless Book can confirm. So if you're watching this, Shawn, feel free to let us know in the comments. Another thing in particular reminds me of Filmation's TV series He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, namely the interactions with the story's main villains. Sometimes I could almost hear He-Man and Skeletor having conversations with one another.
What?
Speaking of the villains, I especially liked how their powers reminded me of the 4 elemental lords from the video game Final Fantasy IV. These lords each have an element as their main powers, namely earth, water, wind, and fire. Classic fantasy, in my opinion. The Nameless Book even features classic tropes, like the one in which the main characters get tangled up with the police. This trope reminded me a bit about Heavy Rain and similar video games by Quantic Dream. Another classic horror trope is a storm with a sudden blackout, something that may or may not occur in the Wordless Book. The story periodically focuses on graveyard themes, and this greatly reminded me of Mighty Max, a toy collection with comic strips released during the early 90s. Mighty Max even had a TV series, which is really cool. I actually grew up playing with Mighty Max toys, so this really warmed my heart. Now, or in just a moment rather, I'm gonna tell you the most interesting reason 7 why I think the Wordless Book is one of the best dark fantasy books. Reason 7 also reveals the number 1 reason why the Wordless Book fits my tastes as a dark fantasy author. But just before that, the 𝗕𝗓𝗏 question. 𝗕𝗓𝗏, what is your favorite dark fantasy book or book series? Comment the name of your favorite dark fantasy in the comments below this video. Let's band together and turn the comment section on this video into a gold mine filled with dark fantasy book recommendations that can benefit all dark fantasy fans out there. Next, before I give you the direct link to the Wordless Book, and before I reveal the final and the most interesting reason why I think the Wordless Book is one of the best dark fantasy books I've read so far, I just want to say thank you, Shawn, for sending me your dark fantasy book, and a signed copy, no less. It's been a delight to both read your book and make this review, and I look forward to reading more dark fantasies from you in the future. Skål, min vän! And now, let's finish this book review. Reason 7 why the Wordless Book fits my tastes. My stories are similar. Yes, I do feel that the tone, feel, and overall storytelling of the Wordless Book reminds me a lot of my own dark fantasy stories. And best of all, I've actually prepared the perfect Birger Tales story for you to start with. But first, as promised, here's the direct link to the Wordless Book, and here is part 1 of the Birger Tales dark fantasy story, Green Witch Woods, in which a flesh and bone-eating monster and its soul-eating familiars live. See you there!